of the Mason-Dixon. This is the Week in Review at the Abbeville Institute. Here is your host, Brian McClanahan.
Welcome back to the Week in Review at the Abbeville Institute. This is your host, Brian McClanahan, and this is episode 138, covering the week of September 10th through September 14th, 2018. Glad to have you back on the program. Glad to be here. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter at Abbeville Institute, like our Facebook page at Abbeville Institute, and of course subscribe to our YouTube page at Abbeville Institute. Go to our webpage, abbevilleinstitute.org, and give us an email address, and we'll give you a free ebook, and you also get our daily dose of Dixie and our weekly email Saturday or Sunday with a link to this podcast. Also, remember to download our app from your favorite app store, Google Play, iTunes, wherever apps are purchased. It is free to download, and of course you get this podcast through that app and also your mobile portal to the website. And please remember that we have a conference coming up November 10th, 2018 in Dallas, Texas. If you're in the Dallas area, you're in Texas, you're in Oklahoma, you're in anywhere out west of the Mississippi, this is the first time we've conducted a conference west of the Mississippi, so we'd like to see you there. All of the information is available on our website. The topic is the revival of secession and state nullification. We've got a great list of speakers set up for you. So going out and go to our website, check that out. We'd love to see you there and help spread the word as well. Okay, this is actually a very special week in review. I'm going to talk about the material on the website for just a couple of minutes, and then I'm going to go into an interview that I conducted with Bobbie Horton at our summer school. So if you don't know who Bobbie Horton is, I'm going to introduce him in a minute, but this is a very special thing. It's a nice treat for you to hear Bobbie talk about what he does and his music. So that's going to be most of this particular podcast. But I just want to mention a few things about the material we have for the week because there's some good stuff there. And one of the things I want to mention, in the book review we did this week, my own darling wife is from Shotwell Publishing. And if you haven't gone out to Shotwell Publishing, shotwellpublishing.com, you're missing out. Shotwell has got, I think close to 30 books now that they've published, and it's a lot of bang for your buck. I mean, you can pick up several books and not break the bank to do it. They're high quality. You've got some great topics. They just put out a book on Lincoln, which is well worth your time to read. They've got several books on the war. You've got the Clyde Wilson files, so a lot of material from Clyde Wilson's archive. Just a wonderful opportunity for you to pick up some really great books on Southern history, culture, literature. They've got a literature section. You've got everything from early Southern history to modern, the modern era. You've got the New South. You've got Phil Lee with his book on Arkansas gangsters. Just a whole lot of great stuff out there. So going out to shotwellpublishing.com and pick up a few books. And my own darling wife, which was from their catalog, was reviewed this week, and that's a collection of letters collected from a South Carolinian during the war, describing the war. I mean, you can't get any better than that when you're talking about primary materials. So it's a wonderful book, along with all the other great stuff they've published. You got a new book on various leaders, Southern leaders, when it comes to things like states' rights and the Constitution. So great stuff out there. Going out and pick up some Shotwell Publishing books, and we've got one reviewed this week. We also had a couple of interesting, we had one work of satire from Louis Liberman, and it's a little take on Dinesh D'Souza's Death of a Nation. He calls it, Louis Liberman calls it The Myth of a Nation, and it's pretty funny. And then you also have a little short story, Mule Breeding, by Paul Yarborough. He does some great stuff. Every now and then he writes little fictional pieces for us, and this little piece is just hilarious. So going out, that was published on Thursday. Going out and read that, Mule Breeding. We had a couple of other pieces, though, that are of historical interest. One had to do with the Louisiana Purchase, and Dave Benner wrote that little piece talking about whether the Louisiana Purchase was constitutional. This is a nice historical argument, and one that I think is important when you're looking at the powers of the executive office, but also what can the general government do under the Constitution? Now, I actually agree with Benner. I think that the Louisiana Purchase was constitutional through the treaty-making power, though it was not necessarily spelled out that way. However, I think that when you look at the the preponderance of evidence there, and you look at what people said about it before the Constitution was ratified and what we could do with treaties, and of course afterwards, I think that it was perfectly constitutional. Though Jefferson's position to question that is admirable, to actually come up with constitutional amendments and say we need to think about this more carefully before we do it was admirable. So that's a nice little piece, and I think Benner does a nice job summarizing the situation. And then we had a piece on Wednesday by John Taylor. It's actually a chapter from his book, Union at All Costs, and it's on the suppression of the First Amendment by the Union Army and the Republican-controlled government, central government during the war. And so that's a nice forgotten part of, not nice because it's terrible, but a nice essay on a forgotten part of the history of the United States during that period of time and the lengths that the Union took to suppress free speech. They were certainly concerned. I mean, Lincoln talked about it all the time, the fire in the rear. They were certainly concerned about the effect that the press would have on morale in the North. You had a substantial number of Northern newspaper editors, all Democrats, who were sniping at the Lincoln administration constantly. And this is where you had Trump stand up and say that, you know, people denounced the Gettysburg Address, and rightfully so. It's a distortion of the American founding. But there were a number, in fact, I would say most Democrat newspapers sniped at it in their editorials when they could. And he wasn't making stuff up about that. Of course, you had the Twitter historian brigade get out there and say this is false, but Trump was exactly right, 100% accurate in saying that. So a lot of great stuff on the website this week, but all that said, let's talk about Bobbie Horton for a minute and then get into that Bobbie Horton interview because it's just a real treat, as I said. Bobbie Horton, if you don't know, has been doing period music for most of his professional career. He actually had a little bluegrass band in Alabama called Three on a String, and he still does that. But he also is more well-known for his period music. He produced the music, for example, for Ken Burns' Civil War documentary series on PBS. He did the music for the, some of the music for the documentary series on the national parks. He's done music for the National Park Service across the board for a variety of things. He has his homespun songs of the CSA. I think that's 6 volumes of music that has to do with original music collected during the 1860s, and he said, you know, he'll talk about that in this interview, so I don't want to steal his thunder, but just amazing stuff to have this music still preserved. He's got the homespun songs of the Union Army, same thing. He's got homespun songs of faith that he's produced, so all this great music out there, and it's wonderful to have someone who's interested in preserving that for future generations, because once that music is gone, it's gone. So you really need someone who's interested in that period of time and the history of that period. And Bobbie is more than just a musician. He really is a historian. And he tells the history through the music. And so we were honored to have him at our summer school. He performed at our banquet. It was the highlight of the week, in addition to just a great summer school across the board and all the other material we had. And eventually we're going to have that stuff all on the website. But this particular performance was just so good. And I had the opportunity to interview Bobbie before the performance, and so you're in for a real treat. You get to hear what Bobbie has to say about his career, about music, about history, and well, let's get right into it. So let's start with this interview for Bobbie Horton. We'll see you next week on the Week in Review at the Abbeville Institute. Bobbie, thank you very much for being here on our podcast. I really appreciate it.
It was my pleasure, Brian. I'm proud to be with you today.
Well, I wanted to talk to you a little about your career, your influences, that kind of thing. So can you just tell me how you got interested in music and what were your influences as a young musician and growing up, and what kind of stuff did you listen to?
Oh, my goodness. Well, I was real blessed to have a father who loved trumpet playing. And I never heard him play because he lost his bottom teeth in World War II. Wow. He did, and it shot his embouchure. But I grew up playing with his polishing his horn. Saying, I'm going to play trumpet one day, and I've been playing that thing since probably I was 6, and that's a long time. I'm 67, so you can do the math. And then my grandfather was my mother's dad was a old-time banjo player, and so from him, he lived out in the country, and so I learned old-time music, or what they would call hillbilly. Mm-hmm. He loved gospel, and I learned all about sacred harp. Mm-hmm. Music, and so I got the love of that sort of thing from him. And then my dad's mother was a classical pianist and an organist at church and just killer player, you know. And so so I got, you know, jazz and whatnot from my dad, and he loved Hank Williams as well. And then and so from Grandma I got the you know, I got the formal music.
Right.
And my dad, of course, loved the big bands, and I grew up that kind of thing.
So you talked about the sacred harp, and that's something we've touched on in our conference this week.
Right.
And
Right.
so I know that you've done some singing Billy Walker tunes on some of your albums.
I have, indeed, yeah.
So,
yeah.
Tell me about that. I mean, how we've talked a lot about religion and influence of music in the South, and I mean, what do you think about that? Do you think that's a major component of, you know, this bridging into why the South is so interested in music? Is that old time religion? Is that it? Do you think, or is it?
Very possibly. You know, and it was. If you think, Brian, things changed in this country, in this world, really, with the invention of Mr. Edison's invention of the recording machine. Because prior to the recording machine, there were plenty of songwriters. I'm going to talk about them tonight with my performance. You know, about how many songwriters there were during the war between the states. But songwriters wrote not for recording artists, professionals. They wrote for people, just everyday folks. And if you're going to have singing, you got to do it yourself. If you're going to play, if you're going to hear playing, you got to do it yourself or hang with somebody that could play. And it was just, I mean, every time there was a gathering of people, there would be a group sing most of the time. And that was the highlight of every meeting, whether it's a Christmas party or a Sunday school party or just a family reunion, people sang and brought instruments if you could play them. And then, of course, during the war, if you could carry an instrument and you could play it, you brought it with you because you have a lot of time to kill, you know. So, and it's just, it's all they had to do. I've just recently done a thing for the bicentennial of Alabama, which is going on right now. And I travel the state with the Alabama Symphony. And I tell these kids, and I said, now I'll try to paint a picture. I said, I want you to imagine there's no electricity, there's no lights in this building, and I'm having to holler because this microphone does not work. There's no electricity. So what now? Go home. Now take a mental trip. Close your eyes and go home. And they're doing it, you know. And I say, all right, walk in the front door or the back door, wherever how you get in your house, walk in there. What do you know? First thing you notice? It's dark. Why is it dark? Well, no electricity. And so then then it's stuffy. There's nothing to move in the air. It's because there's no electricity to move it. Now it's nighttime. What do? Especially in the old days, you gather around the fire because that's your primary light source. It's where Mama does the cooking. And in the wintertime, it's very important to stay warm. And so you're stuck there with your family, with your brothers and sisters and your mom and dad. And you talk, but they know all your stories, and you've certainly heard theirs. So what do? There's nothing to do. You're not going to go outside because of varmints, because it's scary and you're a kid, So what do? Music. Music is that important to our ancestors, whether they were kids or old or medium or whatever. So music is that important because it's always been used. If you think back in the history of man, every generation, every culture has always used music to pass down from one generation to the next. This is who we are. This is what we believe. This is our history. Here's our heroes. And they did it with music because it's been proven that it's hard to remember the spoken word, but you can remember song lyrics for whatever reason because you instantly have a connection between the intellect and the emotional comes together in music. Because if you're singing a sad song, well, the minor key is going to telegraph. This is a sad song, right. And it just piles on the emotion. You go, oh man, I wasn't supposed to cry.
Well, I know I've had you do a performance before at the college where I teach, and I know there was a friend of mine there that heard one of the songs, and he said it was just so powerful, Shiloh, and he was so powerful, and he talked about that raw emotion to these songs and how it gets to your soul.
Yeah, it goes right to you, into you. But, well, the intellect is stimulated by the emotional because it's almost like the emotional allows you to open up, and really absorb what the song is telling you. Whereas if somebody's giving a lecture, if he's a great speaker, you're really into it, but after a while you kind of nodding off, And you do that in concerts too, obviously. But but music, it's a little easier to project whether it's history or, if you're bragging on somebody or some hero that died in battle. I mean, I know one time I was recording a tune about General Claiborne getting killed at Franklin. It's called, and the name of the song was "Oh No, He'll Not Need Them Again." And there was a wives' tale that went out after the Battle of Franklin. The South lost 6 generals there. And Patrick Claiborne was one of them, the most famous of all, and probably one of the best general in all of the Western theater in the southern side. And they found him without shoes on, those boots that he wore. And there's a wives' tale that got going saying that, well, what happened when they were marching from Spring Hill up to ultimately Franklin, they would march 50 and rest 10, 50, 10, just like that. And he had a subordinate officer who was barefooted. He noticed him, and it was bleeding. His feet were bleeding. He was leaving blood in the road, And so when they took one of their 10-minute breaks, Claiborne rode up to him. And like I say, he was one of his officers. He got off the horse and started griping about these old shoes aren't any good on my feet. And he took his boots off. He said, see if you see anything wrong with them. And he got his boots on, and Claiborne rode away with, barefooted. And that's the wives' tale. It may be true. They don't think it is. Dr. Bud Robertson said, I don't think it's true, but it sure is a good story.
It's a good story.
Yeah, it's a great story. But anyway, there's a lady in Texas. Then in 1865, the war's still going. She heard the story and wrote a song. That it is incredible because the music is just so it pulls you into the emotional down. You got an emotional let down because you're so sad with the story. And that took me a long time to sing it because I'd get up there and get all choky because I liked him anyway. And I was coming down the steps from the studio, and Linda said, "What's wrong?" I said, I handed her the lyrics. Said, "See if you can sing this thing," because she likes General Claiborne as well. And it took a lot just to get through the song. But the music, the knowledge of the guy, you have the intellect at work, but you also have that music that's dragging you down. Oh, man.
Why is it that you think that Southerners or Southern songs at that time, people remember them more than they do some of the Northern tunes? I mean, is it because of defeat? Is it because the South, is it because you had someone like Jackson or Claiborne who were killed? I mean, so you look at, I know you've done some discs about the Union Army, but more about the South. And I know you're from Alabama, so so that's more dear to your heart. But why is it that you think these songs, nobody, except for the Battle Hymn of the Republic, nobody thinks of any other Northern songs, but people know some of these Southern tunes. Why is it they've hung on so long?
Well, I think you're right on the lost cause aspect of it. These guys gave everything for so long. And it's like Winston Churchill said, they were the finest infantry to ever walk the face of the earth. But they were unsuccessful, and they didn't know why God let them lose. And so that was golly, Moses, how do you deal with that? They had to deal with it. They had to come home to a destroyed country. The South was just, unless you're real lucky and no army came close to your house, but it was just destroyed, and they came home. And, with a lot of the leadership in Washington after the war, they want to make sure that nothing really did well down here to punish people for that war. And I think they didn't have anything else. They were so poor. It's like the common man's, it's a gift to the common man as much, because I think in the North they were busy doing industrial stuff, and that sort of thing, and and they didn't come home to a destroyed farm, or fields that had been salted or whatever. They didn't, and so I think that's part of it. I think it is the Celtic tradition. Storytelling is part of it, and the singing is just an extension of storytelling. It truly is. And so I think there's just a combination. I think it's the traditions of the South, and then summertime, like today, it's pretty hot outside, and people move a little slower, and so you have a little more time for that sort of thing. Because modern era, it's not quite so much, but I think before air conditioning and before then things really got rocking and rolling economically down here, I think that was just what you did. I really do. It was their entertainment. It truly was their form of entertainment. It's pretty good.
It is. Now, one thing we've said at our conference is that this music comes from somewhere. It's almost like it comes from the mud. It comes up from something. And it seems that Southerners have this desire always, and I've said it, Southerners are like the Irishmen. They're either crying or they're singing or fighting.
Yeah.
And so what do you think music has to say about the Southern identity? That's our conference's music and Southern identity, or Southern identity through music.
Well, I think the influences of the different people that moved here, I think, have a lot to do with that. And music is more ready. I think people are ready to party down here, and you can trace that back to the earliest days of colonial days in the southern colonies. You know, where they celebrated Christmas, not up in Puritanville up north. You know, like Pennsylvania, and you know, there's some laws that were passed forbidding the celebration of Christmas and the baking of mincemeat pies in Connecticut. You know, yeah, and so I think that. Southerners will celebrate anything, you know, because there's a joy about it. And I think the Irish-Scottish tradition is singing and dancing and playing and enjoying your time off. I know the Cajuns in Louisiana have the same thing, because I have a lot of buddies down there, and they are great. They're fun. They really are. But I think that's part of it. And I tell you, the black culture and the white culture come together in music down here, too. It is fantastic. I know as a musician... If you hear a sound you like, you know, if you're a player, no matter what instrument, if you hear a sound you like, well, you gravitate to the man who made it, and you don't care if he's green, but you know, you say, "What? Can I hear it? Show me how you did that." You know, and like Dan Emmett used to travel and go to meet people, black people on the river, you know, because the riverboat made it could go about 12 miles down the river and have to stop and get more wood, going up about 6 miles. Get more wood going northbound. So they were always pulling over to these plantations, and he would hop off boats and go stay with black friends he had, bringing tunes, but taking tunes with him too. So they would swap, you know, and entertain one another, and that's where the 5-string banjo came from, you know. It was because it was a banjo or the bonza on the plantation, and he took it and started making it popular, you know. But it's just a celebration of life. And I think it's the simplicity. I think it's because of the poor. The South was poor, and by design after the war, even though, 60% of the GNP was produced in the South in 1860.
Well, if you look at exports, yes, and cotton exports and tobacco and everything else,
sure.
Quite high. Some people have estimated as high as 80%.
Is that right? I wouldn't argue with that. But anyway, you know, especially after the war, there was just none of that. There was no wealth down here. The wealth that was here was moving here, you know, coming down. And
so I guess you would say that in some ways then these songs, this raw emotion, it's real here. When people have the blues, white or black.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
You don't necessarily have that in the North where everything's going great. Why would you sing about the blues? You know.
Sure.
So that's an interesting position.
You know, and I'll tell you too, Brian. One thing that so many people, white people, were not that much better off than the black people, even during days of slavery. I mean, really, there was not a whole lot of difference as far as they didn't have anything, you know, and there was a camaraderie that comes through that, you know. And, you know, when people get one-on-one, if I can bring something into this, it's fascinating, and I won't give his name because I didn't have permission to do this. But he's at NYU, and he did a study of 20-year major study on race relations in the North and then in the South as well. This guy's from Ohio, and so he's kind of on Cincinnati. He's kind of on the fence, you know. He's in between, and his conclusion. This paper got widespread acceptance, and people were going, "Wow!" And it's about 20 years ago, but anyway, it said in essence. And in the North, people accept, the majority people I'm talking, accept the minority and reject the individual that tries to come in their group. In the South, the majority tends to reject the group and bring in the individual. He's a good guy. And in his last thing he said was, I much prefer the latter.
Wow.
So, but that's Southern. I don't know. It's a very unique culture, and it is a culture because every person that lives here contributes to that culture, and it's like it all hodgepodges down here for some reason, and There's a reason that the first 3 American Idols were from Birmingham, because Birmingham in 1871, it was really coming. I mean, you have people coming in, and black blues piano got started in Birmingham, and a cappella gospel black singing Birmingham is the epicenter for that, because of a fellow who taught at the black high school then, and said we need a choir program, and then he set up a band program, and then his band the big bands during the 40s were sending telegrams saying, send me a trumpet player at Chicago on Saturday. They trusted him. Fez Watley was his name. Fez short for professor. He didn't get paid for the music. He was like mechanical drawing or something. Right. But I mean, it just there's just bubbles in the Southland.
Well, we had one of our lecturers talked about he stopped at around 30 musical forms that all originated in the South.
Yeah. Oh, I don't doubt that.
You can't. And he said I could have gone on further, but you don't find that in the North. There's really not this upswell in the North of a musical style, but you have it in the South. And so that's something, again, we've talked a lot about. A lot of things you're saying we've hit on our themes.
Oh, I don't doubt. Yeah.
And so it's wonderful that you're reinforcing these things as someone who does period music. Now, how did you get involved in period music? And it's an interesting. For a long time, it's becoming more popular, but you didn't find a whole lot of period music.
It's hard. You know what? I can remember driving Jackson, Mississippi to get 2 tunes out of the library. It was that hard to find them back then. But I was so on fire to do that. Well, first of all, I think you have to. I mean, the love of music was instilled because I just was bombarded with it, all the time. And that's just, when I grew up, I assumed I'm going to play baseball, football, basketball, and music. And I did all of it, and it's just music is just something you do, what you're supposed to do, and so that's what I did. But every adult male in my life was a World War II veteran. I'm not kidding you, and I revere these people. I always tried to please them. I tried to impress them, because my gosh, they whipped the Japanese Empire and the Nazis, in a 4-year period. These were incredible people, and so I realized that they're the ones that made history. History is nothing but regular people playing the card that's dealt them and trying to do the best they can do with the situation they're in, whether it's 1942 or whether it's 1862. It doesn't matter. It's the same. All people do that, if they're good people, and so. The love of history came that way. And when I was 9 years old, in fact, I'll tell you, when I was 5th grade, my father was a medic, and he went to North Africa in 42, bless his heart. And then I can tell you,
that was the first part of that was the first Allied invasion right there in North Africa.
Yeah, it was awful. And he didn't know where he was. He was in Tunisia. He said I didn't tell him anything, and he hated it. He told me after he did the honor flight to Washington. I got him on an honor flight with 150 World War II vets. They chartered a 757, and man, when they came home that night, I'm going to get choky here. I'm sorry, but there were 1,500 people waiting on them.
Wow.
Yeah, and they were crying because people were applauding, and it was most incredible. And these are the guys that make history. And I realized that when I was a young man, I said, this man lost an eye at Kwajalein. And this man right here is my baseball manager. And the guy that ran our baseball program was a Marine, and one of the Philippine islands, he had a glass eye, got shot, and if you did real good, he'd pop his glass eye and catch it, and if you did well, that was just one of the rewards you got, But the point is, you appreciate and realize early on that they made a history. My dad got close enough to see the surrender of North Africa, and he was just a sergeant, master sergeant, and he took a picture, and in it's Montgomery and Bradley and some Germans, Rommel went there. Right. He had toothache or something in Berlin. He just went there for the surrender. Anyway, but he got that picture, and that was his pride and joy. And I saw that, and I saw it, and I saw it. And then in one of my school history books, that same setting was there. It wasn't the same picture, but my daddy was there. Right. And this is in a history book.
Wow.
And it all started coming around, and then the centennial hits when I'm 9 years old, and I got sucked in so big time. So I love the history. That's step one, and of course, music you just do. Right. And so I never thought much about their music, their meaning our ancestors, and particularly from the war. But in 1984, I had the task of doing music for a film called The Shadow Waltz. And Milton Bagby was a director and producer. He's a history geek, crazy great guy. And he hired me to do the music for this film. And the setting was 1863, southern Indiana. And Morgan is on the way. John Hunt Morgan, and they're preparing in case he comes into southern Indiana. But of course he turns to the right and goes into Ohio and got captured and escaped. The only one that ever escaped from the Ohio State pen, But anyway, that's another thing. But anyway, that was the setting, and so I got to thinking. I mean, you got to, it's kind of a kissy movie, So I got to write tunes, for those kind of scenes. But I said, man, what if I go find some melodies that these people, were they real people, would know? And I said, I bet you they'll work against picture in the feel that you're after. And so went down to the Southern History Room of the Birmingham Public Library, which is a treasure trove. I found 200 or 300 tunes in one afternoon.
Wow.
And I said, there's something here. There's something here. I started looking at some of these things, and the words were getting to me. I said, wow, that is incredible writing. I got to thinking, people, something that's never talked about, but it struck me during that time, people who wrote well didn't have an outlet, but they could write songs. Because during this war is when the music business got its legs during this war because of the demand for new tunes. And so they had a place to go to write melodies. They were probably a lot of these songwriters that we revere who love historic music may not be able to carry a tune. They wrote great lyrics. And they either wrote the lyrics to an existing melody or had a buddy like a John Hill Hewitt, or was a great musician who did music for them, And so, and it just started from there, and I just couldn't stop. I just said, after the movie was done, it went really well. And then about that time, my SCV camp asked me to do a program on Confederate music. Well, that's great. I went back to the source. I didn't use a whole lot of Confederate tunes because they were Yankees in the movie, but so I put together a program. When it was over, I was kind of depressed. I said, what's going to happen to all this research? Golly, it's so much fun. I hate doing this. I said, I'm going to record this and where I won't lose it. And then
and that became the Homespun volumes?
Oh, yeah. See, I had a 4-track TAC 3340 recorder.
Wow.
I did all those things with 4 tracks.
Wow.
On analog. And I took over our dining room and kind of pushed the family out, you know what I mean? We're going to eventually move where I could have a studio, but anyway, but that's where I got started. And it was because people were saying, man, I want one of those. I want one of those. And so I said, okay. So there was cassettes at that time, and I said, I'm going to do everything myself. So I figured out how to do a J card, and I did all the artwork and all that stuff, and did all the mixing, all the playing, all the instruments, because I got a gazillion instruments around my house, and tried to only use instruments that were available to our ancestors, whatever era we're in. Now I do that same thing with film scoring. For 1742, I don't use an instrument that was not around then. But that's how it all got started. And it just started, people started sending me tunes. And
that's amazing.
It's amazing. It's amazing. And it's a dream come true. And then, of course, from doing these recordings, then American Heritage Magazine wrote an article about what I was doing out of New York. And a guy named Richard Snow, just a great guy. And he told Ken Burns about this guy in Alabama you need to listen to, Yeah. And so, but it's for one, and I know you know this because you relate to it. These people, when you study them, what they did, you revere them. You can't help it, whether they're Southern or Northern, if they're good people and they're doing their duty. If they're black, if they're white, if they're good people and doing what they're supposed to do. You want to know more about them. You want to know them. And so I think that's a whole big part of this music and why I'm excited to do it, because I get to brag on these people that have meant a lot to me since I was a little kid.
Sure. One last question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Go. Just great. What is your favorite tune, period tune? If you had to pick a favorite, or maybe 2 or 3 favorites.
Well, don't do that to me.
If it's too hard to answer, you know. But.
Well, you know, you got to love Dixie. It's a wonderful tune. I like it slow. You know,
I do too. I think
it's a very moving song.
Has that lament to it. You know,
Yeah. It's neat. I've always enjoyed that. And I think one of my very favorite songs of all time is Stephen Foster's "Hard Times Come Again No More." That is a timeless song, and it just talks about, you know, if you think about life, it's just one problem after another, one thing you got to deal with, you know, one hard time after another. And what you pray for, what you long for, is that straight line between the hard times. And you want to kick that old hard time can down the road as far as you can. But it's going to come in every life. The hard times come, and this song identifies the hard times. You know, it's just that one, I think, as much as any, and one other that I can't really hardly do without choking up so badly, but and that is "Wearing of the Gray."
Are you going to play that for us tonight?
I don't know. I don't know if I can. I don't know if I can.
We talked about it on the phone if you're going to do it.
I don't know. I get choky. I mean, I said, God grant to us the privilege upon that happy day of clasping hands with those who fell while wearing of the gray.
Right.
That's hard to get through that after you've, you know, it really is. I mean, I'm no.
Well, it's that passion.
Over.
It's that emotion that you
Well, I
get
love
out
those
of it.
people.
That's
I
right.
love those
That's
people.
right.
I mean, I love Joshua Chamberlain. He was a Yankee. My grandpa was a Yankee soldier, and I'm proud of it. You know, but they're people, and you know, caught up, and especially during this war, their state called them. Whether it's Alabama or whether it's New Jersey, their state called them, and you answer the call because that's what a good patriotic person does. Right. And that's what the girls expect you to do.
That's right. No, that's a powerful
That's
influence.
a powerful influence. You better believe it.
In fact, probably the women in the South are more ardent Confederates than the men.
Oh,
sometimes.
absolutely. Yes, sir.
Yes.
That's a fact.
And well, this has been great. We're looking forward to the concert. Thank you for coming out again, and we appreciate it. We're looking. I mean, this is going to be so much fun. So, you know, we're just excited to have you.
Brian, thank you so much. I appreciate it.